players who not only champion their sport, but who make such a powerful impact and contribution that they are proudly labeled legends. Of the champions we just presented, 4 such players have come to be legendary figures in racquetball. We were fortunate to share a very special time with each, reminiscing about racquetball, but more importantly, getting to better know these people we call legends.
He played the game in a chess-like manner. No player ever put more thought into their game. His domination of the sport in the 70s came about not from his will to win, but from his fear of failure. The master psycher, Charlie Brumfield.
Racquetball was a part of my life that I could never replace. Because of my background in sports, before I commenced playing racquetball, I'd always been unsuccessful. In fact, people considered me athletically retarded. And when I got into racquetball and I learned that by utilizing my own abilities, which included more on the mental side than the physical side, that I could dominate the sport, I received a high. It's almost like a lust for winning. It exceeded what the other player was willing to do to win, and the adrenaline high I got from that can never be replaced. When I came into the game, what I realized was that I had had a failure for so long that it was ingrained in me to think in terms of failure. And that way, my personality is exactly opposite from Marty Hogan, who, it appears to me, thinks only in terms of when he's going to win during the match. It's not a matter of if he's going to win, it's when he will win. Whereas with me, I looked at how many ways there were for me to lose. If I failed to do this, if my opponent did this, I could lose. So what I knew is if I went in with that attitude and everyone knew I had it, I would lose. On this concept of lack of athletic ability as being the foundation of my greatness in racquetball, I can remember many of occasions where not only did I not perform, but even when I learned to perform, I didn't look like I was performing. A good example of that was in paddleball. I was the actual national champion in paddleball in 1967 and 1968 when I took a paddleball class at San Diego State College. I received a C in paddleball while I was a national champion, never losing a game during the entire time I played because the coach thought I looked unorthodox with respect to the standard way that paddleball was perceived to be proper to play. And that's always been something that has aided me because I look like I can't do certain things when I play. I catch my opponent constantly by surprise, particularly with my coverage where I earn the name El Gato Grande, the big cat. I always had tremendous respect for my opponent to the point where I thought I was going to lose unless I went through these following steps. So I would practice a little bit harder. I would hit 1,000 shots a day. I would work out 5 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I felt that if I could accomplish working a little bit harder than they did and still convince them that I thought I was superior, they would give me the edge I needed to eke out the close matches. And if you look at my record in the Nationals, although it's superb, I always won by the slimmest of margins. And that margin was the bravado that I'd artificially constructed. It was a great time, and we were sponsored. I particularly was sponsored early on by Leach Industries through the largesse of Charlie Drake and Bud Leach. And they gave me the opportunity to have the soapbox, the platform. You can see I have a need to tell you how great I am. I loved it. And they sent me to every town around the country that had clubs. I got to meet a million beautiful people and beat them. The names changed, but the scores remain the same. I loved it, and I owe it to my sponsors because without them and without their interest in racquetball, racquetball never would have achieved that window period of brilliance. If you look at the players against whom I was competing, which is the true measure of a legend or greatness, the quality of the players against whom you establish the legend, you're looking at 3 or 4 players, all of whom should have beaten me regularly. One was Steve Keeley, one was Steve Surratt, and another was Paul Lawrence. Those 3 players all had superior physical ability to me. All of them could strike the ball better. and they were superbly conditioned athletes. Those guys were all better than I was. And I gained great satisfaction out of having beaten them so badly for so many years. But I still maintained that fear that one day they'd realize that I was the Wizard of Oz. Marty Hogan is the finest racket athlete that I've ever seen, period, in all racket sports. When he came into racquetball, when he was 17, 18, and 19, it was like watching something from above to watch him play. He had the capacity to do things with the racket and the ball and with his body that no one has before and no one ever will again. I always believed that I was the greatest competitor. I never believed I was the greatest player, if by that terminology you mean capacity to move, capacity to endure, capacity to strike the ball with pace where you want it to go. I never was that person. From the very inception of my career, I was competing against people who could strike the ball better, some of whom were faster, some of whom could endure longer in punishing circumstances. So I never reached the point where, particularly when Marty came on the scene. I mean, Marty was so head and shoulders superior to me or anyone else I've ever seen strike a racket, any kind of racket, from a technical standpoint, that considering myself in the same league was presumptuous. So I never reached the point where I thought I was the best player, but I always believed I was the best competitor. And to me, I convinced myself that that was more important. I convinced myself that somehow it made me a better human or a better person or a better man to be able to take fewer marbles and still win the game. Charlie Brumfield is a player that was not as fast, not as strong, didn't have as good endurance, didn't have as good as shots, but figured out a way to win. And won more matches than he should have, and for that he's proud. I'd like to be remembered as Ty Cobb was. Best that you not be looking back when I'm hitting to the right corner.
The Brum was quite a character. His personality helped put racquetball on the map. But his reign in the 70s was ended by a brash young player from St. Louis, a player who broke all the fundamental rules of racquetball.